This is kind of an executive type level view, really, of the kind of the Azure piece. If we look at it, Microsoft tends to kind of frame this into the four main pillars or capability areas. Interestingly, I tend to talk around it as well as having two broad kind of applications from a business context with the kind of the cloud side. So either kind of digitizing your computing resources, which is almost reimagining your current, so how you may want to do it into that more that kind of cloud-orientated model and architecture, and then kind of reinventing your services through more of the digital type services. And so this is then leveraging new opportunities within cloud to kind of create new ways of engaging with your customers. And there's a number of good examples actually, and we'll talk about too, just as we go through this, really around then how you change the way you work. And so this is then leveraging things like machine learning, IoT, lots of other kind of good services are in there to change the way that you present and engage with customers. So that's really more a fundamental business change of approach, because it's not just an IT level, there's an organizational level that has to be considered around how you engage on that. If we start to look then really around where does that come in from these kind of four main kind of aspects and areas. So the application innovation is certainly more on that digital end. How are you starting to be able to enable yourselves to progress faster? I saw this with doing work in Abu Dhabi in different areas where they were doing a lot of the application development cycle, bringing that pre-starting point into the cloud services, and then mixing actually how they deliver those applications long term. Once they'd validated and once they'd really rationalized whether those apps were working in a live practice. So it gives them the ability really to start to look at how they were working through their application lifecycle, how they were then starting to engage into their customer base, rather than necessarily expending what would typically be a larger set of product resources to get going. You can get up and running very quickly and start to work through how the services kind of come together. So you do see this in terms of different ways that you can actually start to engage with this. There are a lot of the Microsoft PaaS services that you can leverage as underpinning parts of your applications. Some, when you start to look to port those applications into Azure, you need to consider how you may re-architect or re-evolve your applications in that sense. So you may already have, say, existing different database kind of underpinnings for your applications. You don't necessarily have to start immediately by going through to the PaaS services, but it does start to give you a lot more efficiencies in how you would leverage that through. But really, in the idea around this, it's about leveraging the different component parts that exist within the Azure platform to give you opportunities around how you would either speed up your application dev process or kind of change the way that you would maybe deliver in your apps today to give you competitive advantage or to give you actually a way to get to market quicker. We see that kind of being applied through in lots of interesting ways, but it's really around how you might be able to leverage some of those services today. But it is, again, really thinking around, well, how are we working with our applications today? What kind of applications and external services are we presenting? And how may we actually start to change the way they get presented through? There's different options around how you can also manage and support those applications, whether that be through the actual Azure portal or leveraging kind of more deep intelligence through some of the application insights and the operations management suite. And really this is starting to move to a whole process around how you can deliver those applications out. Now, if I put that into a little bit more, well, what does all that kind of effectively mean? RAC was actually really quite a nice example of this. They spoke at Microsoft's Future Decoded event, if anyone was at that session. And if you take an organization like RAC that's been in business for well over 100 years, they're obviously kind of that different type of institutionalized kind of mindset and cultural side, so actually an evolution for them as well as an organization. And their traditional side was they had two main touch points with their customers when they had to renew their car insurance, which effectively was cost and money, and when someone broke down. So even though they were helping them, they were still effectively at a negative point in terms of how they were starting to engage their customers. What they did was actually recreate a telematics service. So this is both something they actually now sell externally to other kind of fleet management companies and other bits and pieces, but as well as something they introduced to their own client base. So this was effectively a mini black box as part of their actual kind of telematics side in terms of how they got intelligence and data in. But they created an application that their customers could engage through. So their customers were then getting rewards based on how they were actually kind of starting to utilize their car or how they were actually kind of driving and all that kind of good stuff. But it also was giving opportunities for them to engage at multiple different points throughout the kind of customer kind of life cycle, as it were, in terms of how those customers were going through their car insurance or how those customers were going through just the general use with respect to that service. And that was something that they engaged through that mobile application type which fundamentally has enabled them to really change the way that they're actually engaging and onboarding customers, both increasing actually the way they bring revenue into the business by having new opportunities that are exposed that they didn't have before, as well as just improving generally the actual quality of the customer engagement. And that's an example of application use that's starting to come through. You see it again more in, say, telehealth and other sides as well, where organizations are again starting to use more wearables, but combined with changing those digital applications to enable them to engage their customers and users in different ways. So it's starting to think a little bit around how you might reimagine the way that you're engaging or the way that you deliver services externally. But it's some very nice examples of how that application innovation is enabling you to really drive your businesses forwards. If we look then to kind of more of the data and intelligence, and this very much go hand in hand as well. So I can describe both of these two really as that kind of, the digital side of the engagement model. This is really around how you're starting to enable information or leveraging intelligence into the different services that you do. So with that, mention the different aspects like IoT on the other side. But fundamentally enabling you to bring a lot of the actual kind of different data points, whether that also be your most traditional data in terms of on-premise data sources, but also external data, or interacting with multiple different pieces around how you then drive analysis of that in terms of a big data world. But really, again, really across all the different kind of mediums that you might have or access in. And then presenting that in different ways. So you've got Power BI as part of maybe the actual front end to that data and analytics model if anyone's works with it. But again, it gives you then the ability to start to rationalize the different data sources and then how you present that back out. And there are now ways of embedding that into your own applications, so you can take it as services. So again, it's really around helping you streamline your development process, working with the Microsoft services that are being kind of made for this, but in a ways that doesn't necessarily add significant overhead or internal kind of management that you would need to do. And this leverages in then to really around, we have the data, we have necessarily the information presented to us, but how are we using that to predict or do more intelligent activities with that? We've seen that actually as an interesting type of example if you go into some of the ways that, yes, you can have cognitive services or bot frameworks, but also, again, leveraging other types of information points that you might not have necessarily traditionally leveraged. So if you haven't heard of this encrypt side of things, this is quite an interesting application of that IoT, the different kind of big data and the machine learning side, where they leverage that into their lifts. So they have that kind of side where they manage a very large, wide, broad kind of estate of in-place services. A lot of, as you could probably imagine, proactive maintenance or maintenance services that they need to do that. What they effectively leveraged was the machine learning and all the different data points that they were able to bring back in was through predictive modeling. So to effectively say, well, actually that lift is showing symptoms that other lifts have exhibited that then broke down in a month's time. We can then send an engineer out proactively to address that. So significantly reducing down kind of cost of the actual maintenance side in terms of being proactive. So you actually could schedule rather than have to emergency respond. But also the quality of the customer service. Their lifts then, in terms of actual kind of performance and reliability, significantly increase. So again, it's actually around changing simple things in some respects, because that data is available to you, but then really doing something very intelligent around how you can improve the quality of your services and engagement to your customers. They've interestingly actually then start to move that, like RAC, into an actual kind of proactive maintenance and service model. So again, they've now created a new commercial vehicle for themselves to actually sell that service back in. And we've seen that in quite a lot of different companies like GE and kind of Rolls-Royce and other ones that are going into this kind of predictive modeling around maintenance and management of their different services. So if we look to then more on, say, what I would refer to as the digitizing your kind of services or your resources, is kind of really where that starts to get into the aspects of how it both supports digital, but also how it supports you to think around your transition maybe to the cloud. And this is really making sure that actually Microsoft is driving this as a very open and kind of very flexible framework for you. So you don't have to, kind of go wholesale necessarily. You take where it makes sense and as it makes sense. There's naturally going to be a transition time for any customer organization as they start to move through these types of cycles. But also it's around supporting to say that not everything is in the Microsoft world. So it's also around having as much of an open kind of available times in terms of supporting Linux and lots of other kind of the open source platforms, as well as multiple other partners. So Microsoft is very kind of supportive of a wide range, and this is just kind of giving you some of the different side of things that you can run within the Azure platform. So fundamentally, it's about, again, giving you choice, so you don't necessarily feel that maybe in the older world, Microsoft, where it was you must be on the Microsoft platform to engage with our services. It is not like that in the Azure platform. If anything, there actually is a higher focus on some of the Linux side and certainly helping sell that through to customers in terms of really enabling and sharing that through. What they are also doing is being very mindful of that hybrid world. So whereas you might have some larger vendors and other bits and pieces would just say, well, it's a stepping stone or it's a delay tactic before you actually get into the public cloud. Depends on how you view that. What I would probably say is it's a transition path. So it's not to say that you might not long-term go full public cloud services, but fundamentally you're not going to be able to go there immediately. There's always going to be certain elements that might have restricted access, so you need to keep those on an on-premise type solution, or fundamentally legacy issues as always in terms of application restrictions and all that kind of good stuff. The way that Microsoft is looking to support that, and I was actually with a customer yesterday, and they were really kind of, although the sales message might be very much public, that is driving evolution of the on-premise. So Azure and all the cloud services are no doubt driving Microsoft's development and the way they're evolving their technology stack, but all of those learnings are being brought into the on-premise capabilities. So we've seen that improvements in Windows Server. We're bringing in different aspects of Azure load balancers. We've seen that in different sides around how Microsoft's just generally improving their security aspects as well. So from some of the identity and access side. But fundamentally, it is really around the full kind of side in terms of the different aspects that would sit across your infrastructure and your data, and having supporting models across both. So we'll talk a little bit about this in the next session, but this is also where you see, whereas today you have that hybrid capability with Azure, Hyper-V, some of the system center type components, it's still similarly a bit of here and there with a level of integration between the two. What we will start to see as well is Microsoft bring through elements like the Azure Stack. So this is taking the actual Azure Resource Manager and bringing that as an option to on-premise. So effectively consider that an Azure region in your data center. Now, at the moment, it's going to probably be more of a black box solution, so it will be kind of sold as part of a containerized kind of hardware piece as well, really to make sure you can have that control, or Microsoft can support it, because it isn't just, here's a piece of software, go and set up and install it. They will actually enable you to, or as a managed option, really drive that kind of update cycle with you, make sure it's in compliance, make sure it is built to best practice. So we're seeing, the ability to actually really try and make a very uniform, so that you do have the same ability across both the public cloud and your kind of own private cloud services. So you're not necessarily having that overhead of that consideration of, well, how do I easily shift between one to the other, or have that ability to move freely without necessarily some of the restrictions you may consider or have in some respect today. And we will continue to see this evolve as time goes on. And then if we look to the actual kind of final piece in terms of trust, interestingly, this is probably one that's been very hotly contended, certainly we took throughout the public sector for many years, although it's becoming less of a concern as people get more comfortable in terms of actually how the cloud services are working. I'm sure you've probably seen or heard that there's a UK data centers now open and available, and we're continuing to see the more service come into that. But Microsoft are obviously very strongly focused around how they ensure that customers can trust and engage with their platform. So, interestingly, they do have both the red team and the blue team, and there's some good videos and some other bits and pieces that you can go and have a look at. But fundamentally, this is also around how they're having the red team is there to attack the Microsoft network. They're probably one of the third largest in terms of telephony kind of communications provider in the world, if you consider their internet facing. So they get very broadly attacked, so they need to ensure that's there. And then the blue team is effectively there for protection. And the red team isn't just doing, well, we can only do limited attacks. They do quite interesting stuff like take a bunch of posters, effectively. They went into the kind of Redmond canteen and kind of put that through, which said, share your password. We're doing kind of complex password testing. you win an Xbox. And it was obviously quite surprising how many people shared their password, or maybe how disappointing, should we say. But fundamentally, that then drove an internal change, which I'm sure you guys get the role guides all the time, to drive that also cultural and kind of considerations around how that starts to drive through. But, very focused, very continually evolving that as well to make sure, that they are keeping up with. 34 regions, although that's pretty ever increasing, and I think that has actually already gone up in terms of count. And then, very much that they're focused on that relentless business commitment to having the appropriate security services. And we see some of the actual kind of UK more specific elements in here as well, and continuing to improve. But of course, with the entry of the UK DCs, we'll ever see that continue to increase. More relevant in some respects to some of the kind of, say, public sector services, but relevant also, of course, to regulatory industries and other bits and pieces that are starting to come through. What very much is the case, depending on your levels, is Azure as a standard is classified as official. And with some of the kind of main Microsoft technologies that will be included in a lot of your productivity suites, you can move that to official sensitive reasonably kind of comfortably. And then it's really around considerations around how that data and what data you may need to manage and secure. But what can be said is Microsoft are ever focused on ensuring that this is improving and you have that regulatory support from them. So they want that to be obviously more secure than any other environment for you. And just as effectively kind of the closing point, it's really then just kind of considering that, as I say, it's not just considering that Azure is an alternative way to have your on-premise infrastructure. You, of course, do have that option, and maybe that's probably the option that gets talked around sometimes more, or is the more obvious one, because it's the thing of, well, move your off-premise into the cloud. But I would say that it's considerations around actually how you can think about maybe reimagining the way you deliver services today. The application, the innovation, the data, and the intelligence, those are services that traditionally would have been very difficult for you to introduce to a scale in your own businesses. But this is where the kind of cloud can really help you kind of re-engage and see how you might, evolve your internal services to help the business drive forwards. But of course, it's really obviously as well around how you take that journey. So the hybrid, the ability to start to kind of really digitize your current, have that kind of more consistent approach across both your on-premises and the cloud. So you're not necessarily having to manage two in effect, but ever evolving with that. So yeah, just as an opener to it, it's really to help set a little bit of the context. What we'll be looking at kind of more next is a bit more of the whole digitizing your computer resources. So how that Azure stack and how Azure is then kind of connected in. But yes, I hope that was useful for you. A lot of information in a relatively short period of time, but kept us back to time. But yes, thank you very much.